Good evening. My name is Mayra de la Garza, and on behalf of the Institute of Politics, the Harvard Journal of Hispanic Policy, the Kennedy School of Government Latino Caucus, and La Alianza of Harvard Law School, I'd like to welcome you to the third annual Harvard Latino Law, Business, and Public Policy Conference. We are honored to have the Honorable Luis Caldera, Secretary of the U.S. Army, join us for our opening keynote address. The growing influence of the Latino community on society becomes more evident every day, as evidenced by the prominent position held by our speaker today. While advances have been made within our community, the road towards achieving success and positive change has been a challenging one both for Latinos and other people. This year's conference will explore the complexities faced by all professionals. Our panelists will share the personal experiences of struggle and success that are sure to motivate and inspire those in attendance. I invite you to attend a full day of conference events on Saturday. If you would like more information, please feel free to visit our registration table after the address. Now, without further ado, it is my honor to introduce to the podium Senator Alan Simpson, Director of the Institute of Politics, who will introduce tonight's keynote speaker. Senator Simpson.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Maida. It is a pleasure to welcome you as Director of the Institute of Politics. Having served, however, 2 years in the U.S. infantry in Germany, I do not wish to be drafted. Oh, no. It is impossible not to recall those days. And when, as I was a lowly second lieutenant wandering around in Germany, and you met the Secretary of Army during your maneuvers, you saluted, and therefore I do so now. You never forget that. Did you see how crisply I did that? Haven't forgotten. And so this evening is a great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for the third annual Harvard University Latino Law, Business, and Public Policy Conference. We want a speaker who could speak from authority and experience on law, business, and public policy. So tonight we're very fortunate to have a leader in all three fields. In the law, he was a graduate of one of the two finest law schools in America, Harvard. The other was the University of Wyoming in Laramie. He's a graduate of Harvard Law School and served in the country's top law firms, specializing in the areas of corporate transactions, municipal finance, and he has represented the Los Angeles County and state and federal court as a deputy county counsel. In business, he received his MBA from right here, one of the nation's top business schools, the nation's top business school, and of course, Harvard Business School. And in public service, which is our mission here at the Institute of Politics, he began his public service career as an Army officer and as a lawyer after graduating from West Point. And he served as a commissioned officer in the U.S. Army from 1978 to 93. Rose to the rank of captain and was awarded the Meritorious Service Medal and other awards. His public service also includes elected office. It's an extraordinary background and record of this man. He served for 5 years in the California legislature, where he represented nearly 400,000 residents of the 46th Assembly District located in the downtown Los Angeles area. That's just 76,000 less than the whole state of Wyoming that I represented, 476,000 in the entire state. I wanted you to get that clearly there. And he represented that many as a representative of the Assembly District, the 46th. He served as a member of the Intergovernmental Policy Advisory Committee to the U.S. Trade Representative. In his current role as Secretary of the Army, his responsibilities include, as the 17th Secretary, statutory responsibility for all matters relating to Army manpower, personnel, reserve affairs, installations, environmental issues, weapons systems, and equipment acquisition, communications, financial management. It's a tremendously broad job. And particularly, and finally, hear this. That's an old Navy phrase, hear this, but hear this. Those of you who may think of going into the private sector to get management experience, recall that this secretary leads a workforce of just over 1 million active duty National Guard and Army Reserve soldiers, and 270,000 civilian employees. People forget that part of the service. All of these accomplishments, and still a young man with no gray hair, at least hair, which is the critical loss of mine. Well, and so it is a great honor and a great privilege for me, and so to welcome our speaker, the United States Secretary of the Army, the Honorable Louis Caldera.
Thank you very much, Senator Simpson, and especially for your service to our nation and your continued service in this Institute of Politics. Might I thank you for your introduction. I wanted to thank the Harvard Latino Journal of Public Policy, the Latino and Latina students and alumni of Harvard College, the Law School, the Business School, the Kennedy School, for inviting me to be the keynote speaker at this conference, which will look closely at the challenges of providing leadership for the United States' growing Latino community. By attending this conference, you're demonstrating your personal commitment and interest in addressing these very important challenges and providing that leadership. I want to thank you for opening this conference to those from throughout the greater Harvard community who also care deeply about these issues. As a graduate student, I spent a lot of time here at the Kennedy School's Institute of Politics and at the ARCO Forum, and I know what an important forum this is for talking about issues that matter to our country. I have wanted to come here for some time, where many of our nation's leaders are educated, to talk about the continued importance of military service in our society, to challenge you to think about your obligation to serve our country in uniform, and to consider how the nation can best communicate to a new generation this ideal that service to country should be one of the goals of life of anyone wishing to participate fully in and contribute fully to a democratic society. I am delighted to also have the opportunity to talk about the need for our country to find more and better ways to tap into the enormous talents of its growing Hispanic American community, and the role that graduates of institutions like Harvard should play to make that happen. I'd like to say a few words about each of those two topics, which are not as unrelated as you might think. First, let me address the challenge of ensuring that Hispanic Americans are full participants in the opportunities that this nation has to offer to all of its citizens. 4 weeks ago at a ceremony in the White House, President Clinton spoke forcefully about the barriers of opportunity facing Hispanic Americans. He noted that while Hispanic Americans have made much progress in the last 8 years in everything from reducing the unemployment rate to increasing home ownership and small business starts, there is still much left to do to lift more Hispanics out of the meager circumstances in which they find themselves and to truly turn our nation's diversity into the asset that it can be. The President emphasized something that I deeply believe to be true, that as well as our country is doing today, and with all the prosperity that we enjoy, that we have not even begun to tap the full talent of the American people. He said, we have only begun to scratch the surface of our potential as a nation. We have only scratched the surface of the potential of our young people. And we have only scratched the surface of what we can be and what we can do because of our increasing diversity. He is right that there is much to do to better tap into the talents of the Hispanic community. And it is vital that we begin to do it now, given that Hispanics are such a large and fast-growing part of our nation's population. Consider that in 5 short years, Hispanics will be the single largest minority group in our country, and that by the midpoint of the century, Hispanics, Americans, will represent fully 1/4 of our nation's population. 25%. Thus, if our nation's leaders in government, in business, in science, industry, education, journalism, are to reflect our nation's diversity in the decades to come, roughly 1/4 of those doctors, CEOs, elected officials will come from Hispanic American families. But there are many challenges to making the vision of unleashing the full potential of every child in this nation a reality. Just listen to what some of those challenges are that confront the Hispanic community. Hispanic children are three times more likely to live in poverty than non-Hispanic white children. 1/3 of Hispanic children will have no health insurance. More than any other group, 1/3 more than African American children, double the figure for non-Hispanic white children. Hispanic unemployment is twice that of whites and almost double the national average. And of Hispanic adults who do hold jobs, only half are as likely as other Americans to hold managerial or professional positions. So is it any wonder that with that foundation to build on, that the educational statistics for Hispanic children are so bleak? Hispanics have the highest high school dropout rate, in some places 50% or more. Hispanics have the lowest rate of college attendance, with only 1/3 of Hispanics graduating from high school going on to college. And for those who do go on to college, Hispanics have the lowest rate of college completion. So at a time when a good education is the key to success in life, and fully 1/4 of our nation's adults have bachelor's degrees, less than 10% of Hispanic adults have earned a bachelor's degree. So there are real challenges in healthcare and education and employment that make it hard for many Hispanic American families to build a better life for themselves and to give their children the kinds of opportunities that we all want for them. These challenges, of course, are not unique to the Hispanic community, and we must be equally committed to overcoming them for all the children of our great nation, regardless of their background, because it is the right thing to do, and because it is the smart thing to do. Everyone stands to gain if we help every child in our nation fulfill his or her God-given potential. Now, I believe that we can overcome these hurdles if we will join together to make it happen. We will do it, first of all, by communicating to Hispanic American children and to all young people the boundless opportunities that are available to them if they will work for them. And second, we will do it by ensuring that those opportunities are real. You and I, who've had some success in going to college and in experiencing the wider world, have the ability to communicate the message of limitless opportunity to these children in a way that sometimes even their own families cannot. Indeed, we need to help those parents understand that they have a right to demand even more of the schools that their children attend and of the teachers who are educating their children. There is simply no room for schools that don't expect much from children merely because they are poor, because they are immigrant children, or migrant children. I know. I came from one of those immigrant, poor families where a college counselor told me that I should take auto shop and learn a skill. But it will not be enough just to fire the imagination of these children or raise their expectations without giving them the tools that they need to realize their dreams. So the second thing that we need to do is to give them the resources that they lack today. Modern schools with up-to-date books, science laboratories, and computer centers, experienced teachers who set high expectations and believe in their students' ability to learn and to go on to college, and a demanding curriculum with standards that reflect high achievement goals and include advanced placement courses. And we must increase access to affordable, high-quality higher education. There are, of course, other needs for the moral, physical, and intellectual growth of these children, but none so important in my mind as improving their educational opportunities. Now, you may not realize it, but the military has a big role to play in training and educating America's young people. We are the largest employer of young people in America, and we have a huge stake in their educational achievement and training before and after they enlist. I have made it a priority to provide increased opportunity for education and training in the Army and in America's high schools through Army-sponsored programs. We are developing a national dropout prevention program. We are investing in stay-in-school programs. We sponsor the National Science Center to interest young students in math and science through rolling science vans. We are expanding our junior ROTC programs that teach better citizenship in our high schools. We are making recruiting Hispanics who are underrepresented in our force a priority, including by increasing the targeted advertising budget. We have developed the Army's high school completion program to reach out to young adults who did not graduate from high school and give them the chance to get back on the right track. We are recruiting Hispanics not only for our enlisted ranks, but for our officer ranks as well. We are adding hundreds of ROTC scholarships at Hispanic serving institutions, and we doubled the number of first-year Hispanic cadets at West Point in 1 year. We are improving our in-service education opportunities for soldiers so they can work on their college education while they serve. And I have personally stressed to our senior uniformed leaders how important it is for the Army to represent the great diversity of our nation throughout its ranks, from private to general officer, and to do the mentoring and leader development that we need to do to get people promoted up the ranks. Now, interestingly, I've had a mixed response to these initiatives to expand opportunities for Hispanic Americans to serve. For the most part, these efforts have been welcome by those who understand the long and proud history of military service by Hispanic Americans in the United States Army, and who understand that the Army represents opportunity and upward mobility. However, from a much smaller group, I have also received a more negative response. Notwithstanding that we have been emphasizing career development opportunities in the officer as well as enlisted ranks, there are those critics who ask, do you think that our people are only good enough to be soldiers? Only good enough to be soldiers. Which leads me to the second topic that I wanted to discuss, which relates to this attitude among many in our country that military service is not desirable or worthwhile. Or to put the question in a different manner, what is it that we, as a society, must do to communicate to a new generation of young Americans that military service is an honorable obligation of citizenship that each generation must fulfill if this nation is to remain strong and free? And if our country is to exercise the leadership role in the world that people of other nations are so desperately looking for us to fulfill. You probably have heard that our armed forces are having trouble filling the ranks. In the Army, we were short last year 6,500 soldiers in the active ranks and about 10,000 soldiers in the Army Reserve components. These shortages impact our military readiness and our ability to serve the country. There are many reasons for these recruiting shortfalls: a strong economy, more young people going to college, easy access to financial aid. But the most troubling reason that we see in our annual youth attitude surveys is the steep decline in interest in military service and in willingness to serve. Throughout our nation's history, military service has been a proud tradition for many American families and a rite of passage into adulthood and into citizenship for native-born and immigrant alike. During World War II, 40% of available adult men served. During Korea, 60% of available adult men served. During Vietnam, it was 10%, and not all of them served in a combat theater. Today, less than 15% of adult men under the age of 65 have ever served. So the tradition of passing on to succeeding generations the first-hand knowledge of the maturing impacts and the benefits of service has been lost in our country. We have to find a new way to animate the spirit that causes young people to want to serve of their own volition. And it must be a spirit that is broadly shared, so that the burden of defending our country doesn't fall chiefly on a group we don't relate to because they are not our sons and daughters, our brothers and sisters. Let me ask the undergraduate students who are here with us tonight, very honestly. If you called home here tonight and you said, "Mom, Dad, I just signed up for the Army," what would their reaction be? Would they say, "I'm proud of you. You are doing something wonderful for your country"? Or would they say, "Oh no, that's a mistake"? What would you say to your roommate if your roommate told you, "I'm thinking about joining the Army"? Let me tell you about some of the things that you are missing by not serving as a soldier in our Army. You are not seeing our country's principles and values in action. You are not seeing our nation's decency and humanity in aiding those most in need, responding to humanitarian crisis in Central America, in Africa, in Turkey, this day today alone in Mozambique. You are not seeing the high expectations that people around the world who yearn for freedom from oppression and freedom from want have of our nation. And you are not experiencing their deep gratitude when America stands up to the horrors of ethnic cleansing by a Slobodan Milosevic in Bosnia and in Kosovo, or when America stands up to the naked aggression of a Saddam Hussein invading a small neighboring country like Kuwait. Without our nation's moral and political leadership in the world, these multinational efforts to thwart the will of tyrants would never have occurred. Aggression and ethnic hatred would have been rewarded, and the world would be a less safe place. And without brave and selfless soldiers willing to put themselves in harm's way, our country could not exercise that leadership. By not serving in the Army, you are missing on a chance to learn something about your fellow citizens. Our soldiers may not all be as well educated as you are, but you will be humbled by the things that you will learn from them. You will be impressed by their courage, their skills, their tenacity, their resiliency, and their decency. And they have much to learn from you. You have gifts in abundance to share with them. And that is what it means to build a community. By working together as a team, as equals, with people of backgrounds more diverse than you can ever imagine, you will learn much about your own limits, and you will gain a greater appreciation for the challenges, the struggles, and the triumphs of your fellow citizens. You will learn firsthand that the strength of our country is found in the faith, goodwill, and hard work of its most ordinary citizens. To those of you who aspire to be leaders for our country, political, business, civic leaders, I would say it is very important that you serve. As opinion makers in our society, you will shape public attitudes about America's role in the world. You will influence or make our domestic and foreign policy decisions, including decisions about the size and organization of our military, and whether to send America's sons and daughters into harm's way. You will gain a profound respect for our men and women in uniform, appreciate their capabilities and needs, and understand the consequences of your actions for people with whom you share a common bond. Now, there are those of you who are going to say, well, I don't aspire to be a member of Congress. I have more to offer the country by getting a doctorate or an MBA or starting a new internet company and becoming a job creator and a wealthy philanthropist. Well, you'll have time for all those pursuits. In fact, after 2 or 4 years in the military, those pursuits will be all the more meaningful to you, knowing you've done your part to deserve those opportunities. Because like the Private Ryans of the past, from the Revolutionary War to the Gulf War, You will have helped preserve the freedoms that make it possible for us to enjoy the prosperity and opportunities we have today. And with time, your appreciation for that time, that period in your life, will be even greater. Just ask your grandfather or someone you know who served. It is very likely that they will tell you they got more out of it than they put into it. Just ask Senator Simpson, who was a... As I've gone around the world talking to soldiers from Kosovo to Korea, I've heard them say how much more they appreciate all the blessings that our country has to offer because they have seen how the rest of the world lives and how hard people throughout the world struggle to achieve what our country has achieved. I have truly felt, after talking to them, that too many of our young people in America are missing out on a very important formative experience by not serving. You will be a better citizen for having done your part. Is there an element of sacrifice to serving? You bet there is. You will sacrifice some of your privacy, some of your comfort. You may be called to serve far from home and loved ones. But sacrifice and commitment to a principle, service, is an important lesson to learn. Overcoming hardship through sacrifice has been part of our national experience throughout our history. The values of the military, duty, honor, selfless service to country and to your fellow man, self-discipline, loyalty, integrity, respect for others, physical and moral courage. These are the values that made our nation what it is. Sacrifice means giving of yourself for a greater good. Well, when do you plan to do that in your life? It is a good thing to do when you are young. The lessons will last you a lifetime. Will some be called to sacrifice all? Yes. But to whom should the obligation of accepting that risk fall? Which of us is better than those men and women of that group that we call the greatest generation? We call them the greatest generation not because of the prosperity that they created after the World War, but because they sacrificed so that you and I and future generations might live in a free world. In this time of relative peace in the world, it is not enough to say, well, if the big one comes, if I'm called to serve, well, then I will do my part. We need some of you today to keep our nation strong because we do not know when we will be called. And because the stronger that we keep our nation, the less likely it is that we will be called in as dramatic a way as we were in the 20th century. The obligation to serve should fall broadly across all segments of our society, including students at Harvard. Indeed, Harvard has a rich tradition of military service. You need only pause to reflect on the beauty and symbolism of Memorial Hall and Memorial Church to remember this. And while we're talking about this, let me say something about ROTC. I did not start with this subject because I believe there is as much value in serving in the enlisted ranks as there is in being an officer. But we also need to attract young men and women who will become the career officers, who will become the caring, ethical, compassionate, and moral leaders of our Army for the future. So let's make Harvard, as it is in so many other fields, one of the premier institutions for developing citizen soldiers for the Army. And let's start doing it by doing what the Undergraduate Council called for last year in voting for a return of ROTC to this campus after 30 years. The ROTC unit here at Harvard was the oldest in the nation before it was disbanded. A resumption of this program on this campus would be a wonderful vote of support for the men and women in uniform who sacrifice every day on the front lines of our nation's national security efforts all over the world. In 1869, as he was about to begin his storied career tenure as president of this university, Charles William Eliot spoke eloquently of the need for this institution to foster the sense of public duty, that great virtue which makes republics possible. He asked whether Harvard had properly imbued the spirit of public service in its students, whether Harvard's graduates had honored freedom and loved their country. He was able to answer his question with pride, citing the list of the Senate, the Cabinet, and the diplomatic service, and the roles of the Army and the Navy. Theirs is no mercenary service, he said. Other fields of labor attract more and would reward them better, but they are filled with the noble ambition to deserve well of the Republic. So let me challenge you to do your part. I ask you to reflect upon serving your nation and to support those who are serving our nation or are thinking of serving our nation in uniform. I ask you to consider, what is your obligation to serve your country? Let me close by saying thank you once again for inviting me to come talk about two distinct but important challenges for our country. The importance of tapping into the talents of communities in our nation, rich in spirit, that have so much to give our nation, but which need our help to nurture and develop that potential. And how to reanimate the spirit of public service in the young people of our country so that the United States can continue to be the beacon of hope in the world, a powerful and moral force in support of liberty, individual freedom, and respect for human dignity. No tasks are more important to the future of our nation. Thank you, and God bless you.
If you have questions, please come on up to the mics, the mic here and there. Any questions for our fine speaker?
Hey,
just give your name and a question, which would be good.
Question, Vivek? Okay,
Yeah.
that's why I'm here. My name is Jeff Duritz, and the question I had for you, you spoke about efforts to help Hispanic Americans here in this country, and I was wondering how that would relate to people in this country helping Latin Americans in their own countries, specifically regarding the School of the Americas, which obviously is a very contentious issue. It's widely known as in Latin America as School of the Assassins for very good reason. And I was wondering what your personal feelings were as a Latino American in a position of power as the Secretary of the Army about the school.
We have a very important role to play in Latin America. That part of the world has become much more important to our country, both economically, culturally, socially, in so many different ways. And that is part of the reason why we needed to pass that free trade legislation, that fast-track legislation. Other countries are there and doing that. The European countries are there trying to do that. And frankly, it's our hemisphere. We should be involved in that. We have a common destiny with the people of Latin America. They are our neighbors. They are our brothers. The Army is a very important instrument of change in those nations. And the way you work that best to change the nature of what those armies' relationship is, they serve democratic governments. Today, every country in Latin America, South America is a democracy with the exception of Cuba. And all of those countries, as they transition and strengthen democracy, we work to strengthen democracy through the military.
Do you consider Mexico a democracy?
Pardon?
Do you consider Mexico a democracy?
Yes.
I'll give you
That's
that.
why they're, excuse me, anyway, Mexico's having an election in July. As you know, they had their first open primary this year. All those countries, we work to strengthen democracy by teaching their military officers what the proper role for the military is in support of a democratic government. And just as our military is changing to face new threats in the post-Cold War world, their militaries are also. The most important subjects that we teach in Latin America: disaster response. How do you respond to Hurricane Mitch? How do you respond to mudslides in Venezuela? How do you respond when there is a humanitarian crisis? We teach them, so that's rapid reaction, rapid response. We teach them, how do you fight the scourge of drugs? That is a tremendous threat for the countries of Latin America, for stability and democracy, because of the corrupting influence of drug trafficking money in their financial institutions. And it not only poisons our children, it threatens the stability of democracy in those countries. We teach them respect for human rights. We do not teach American soldiers to violate human rights. That is illegal and immoral, and we don't teach it. Soldiers are no different than you. They have the same values that you have. They would not violate their own moral principles to violate human rights. We don't teach it to American soldiers. We don't teach it to foreign soldiers. We never have. School of the Assassins is a term that is used in the United States. It is not used throughout Latin America. The militaries in those countries are going to play an important role in the changes and transformation that is occurring in those countries. And so it is important that we engage them on topics like human rights. And we stress to them that what we are trying to do is work to have regional security cooperation. That's the best way to do it. How do you lower regional tensions? How do you lower boundary disputes between Ecuador and Peru? You do it on a regional basis if all countries are contributing to solutions to common problems. That's what we're doing, bringing those armies together. And as we do that, we tell them, we can't support you in security assistance if you are human rights violators. First of all, it is ineffective as a military force. Professional military forces do not violate international laws. They don't do it because it doesn't make you effective as a military force. And so you have better ways of accomplishing your goals for your society. That is what we teach. Now, we're changing the School of the Americas. It's not going to be known as the School of the Americas. We've got a legislative proposal in front of the Congress right now that is going to put into law the notion, and just right there so everybody can see it, that what we do at the School of the Americas is strengthen democracy by teaching things like disaster assistance, counter-drug, counter-organized crime, meeting those other kinds of legitimate security needs that those nations have.
Thank you. Here, please.
My name is Marissa Jones. I'm a first year here at the Kennedy School. And I wondered if you could address the issue of the United States' role in peacekeeping operations around the world. It seems like there's kind of growing reluctance to commit those who are serving our country in the military to long periods overseas. At the same time, the UN is getting more and more involved in those kinds of operations. What do you see as our role? How do we make those kinds of decisions?
I think those are good, appropriate, and important roles for our military to be playing. Since the end of the Cold War, our national security strategy, how will we keep our country safe and free, has been to engage the world, to build friends for the United States, to contribute to stability and security across the world. And we do that by our presence. We do that when we have soldiers who are forward deployed in Korea and in the Persian Gulf. We do that through our engagement. We do that through things like responding to humanitarian crises that can also destabilize countries by fighting drugs. Peacekeeping missions are very important. In that part of the world where we are today, in the Balkans, Slobodan Milosevic, after the breakup of the former Yugoslav Republic, started 4 wars over the course of the last decade by flaming nationalism and ethnic hatreds and murdering and raping and burning people out and doing atrocities that shocked the world. And so the United States led the effort. Without the United States, I think there is no European effort to step into those situations. And where they are is a critical part of the world. You have a situation where beyond the Balkans you have Turkey, you have Hungary, you have Macedonia, you have Greece, you have Italy. And these situations become very destabilizing for countries that are NATO member countries. So if Turkey gets involved in an ethnic war on one side and Greece gets involved on another because their natural affiliations in those ethnic conflicts would be opposite to each other, the United States has a serious problem, and Europe has a serious problem. And so that is an important part of the world for us, where it costs us much less in treasure and in lives to intervene early and to try to set the context, to try to set the stage, to recreate democratic societies, to rebuild institutions of civil society, to support moderates who are trying to build multicultural societies where you respect everybody's rights and dignity. And that's what we're trying to do there. And we are making progress in Bosnia, and I think we will make progress in Kosovo. But it is hard work to do that. The United Nations, the non-governmental agencies, they have to do their part as well. The military can't do it alone. They set the context. Others have to come in and build those institutions. I think it is a good and appropriate use of our soldiers because it contributes to our nation's security. It does raise the question whether our Army is too small to be doing all of these kinds of missions, and when we downsized it after the end of the Cold War, we may have downsized it too much. And so that's something we have to look at.
Good evening. My name is Hector Rosario. I'm a PhD student in mathematics at Dartmouth. And in a letter I wrote to you dated February the 8th, I mentioned to you what your role was and what your position was with regard to the live firing range in Vieques, Puerto Rico. I was calling upon you as a Latino to feel for the people in Puerto Rico who are struggling to get the U.S. Navy out of there after 58 years of destroying our environment. Now, in a letter dated March the 3rd, you did not address my issues, and I have the letter with me. Now, the question is, yes, sir, are you willing to face responsibility for all the Puerto Ricans that the U.S. Armed Forces will have to kill in order to get them out of the live firing range? Because we are not giving up our land. We're staying in there, and the only way to get us out is to kill us.
Hector, nice to see you, and good, I did write back to you
Yes.
because, and I told you that the Vieques situation is a Navy situation, and that's who you should address your questions to. The Army has a great reputation with the people of Puerto Rico. Our reserve units, our National Guard units, the U.S. Army South, we just stood that up in Puerto Rico in a ceremony where I stood there with Governor Rosello, and he welcomed us because it is important for Puerto Rico's leadership role in this part of the world to have U.S. Army South headquartered there. All of our U.S. Army activities, all of our nation's activities in Latin America and in South America are going to come out of Puerto Rico. That is a good thing for Puerto Rico. Our ROTC programs, our recruiting, our junior ROTC programs, Puerto Rico is a great place for the Army to be, and many Puerto Ricans have served honorably in our armed forces, including the soldiers of the 65th Division in the Korean War. So we honor their service, and we welcome their service, and we have no quarrel with the people of Puerto Rico. The issue that the Navy has with Vieques is a Navy issue, and I will leave it for the Navy to address that issue, and for the people of Puerto Rico to make their own determination according to the proposal that President Clinton put forward. But what I will say is that our armed forces have got to train somewhere, because the training they do in peacetime is what keeps those soldiers alive in time of war. Our brothers and sisters, our hermanos y hermanas in the Army will stay alive if they do realistic training, which they must do. Now, there are many places in the United States where we have civilian populations that live much closer to the training ranges than they do in Puerto Rico. You cannot have a NIMBYism, not in my backyard mentality, that says, well, I don't want you training in California, I don't want you training in Texas, I don't want you training in New Mexico, I don't want you training in Puerto Rico. You cannot have it if you hope to have a country that is strong and that is free. That is part of the price that we pay as citizens of this great country to have a military that can do what it can, to have the leadership role in the world that we have today, to have the prosperity that we have today. We need to be able to do that kind of training. The issue the Navy has is an issue for the Navy to deal with the people of Puerto Rico about whether they will be able to remain there. It is a unique training place. I don't study the Navy programs, so I can't give you the analysis.
Next question, please, right here.
Thank you. Secretary Caldera, good to see you again. My name is Martin Sepulveda. I'm not a student here, but I'm honored to be a panelist tomorrow. I'm a naval reservist, but I promise you haven't bombed the island. We don't take that lightly. A couple of things, Secretary Caldera, if I can digress. I'm a naval reservist, and I just got back from Kosovo and Bosnia from actually 8.5-month tour, but I spent the first 2 months in Italy on vacation, then I got sent to Bosnia and Kosovo. And I would really like to emphasize the Secretary's words for people who've never served in the military. I'm a reservist. I've gotten recalled to active duty twice, and the first time I was 30, second time I was 40, or I turned 40. But my point is, you'll never know how precious your life is to other people and what you mean to other people as an American until you're there in a situation where everything's been taken away from them. While I was there, I didn't get CNN or whatever it was on a very regular basis, but when I did get it, it seemed, some of the discussions seemed to be that this thing is working. I have a loud mouth anyway. Some of the discussions seemed to be, well, gee, there wasn't 100,000 people killed, there was 20,000 or 10,000. I will tell you, as a guy who was on the ground and saw the tragedy or the rape camps, the victims that were just mindless because they seemed some atrocities that we haven't even heard of since World War II, it didn't really matter what the numbers were. The discussion will go on long after, you know, we're going to be done here.
Question, sir?
Yes, I'm getting there. Okay. But the point is the service. Please take into consideration the service to your country and what that means, not only as an American, but to people abroad. Now, my question to the Secretary is, given all the commitments we have, do you see the draft coming back, and what's your position on that?
No. I don't see it I don't see it coming back because, first of all, we don't need that many more young people to join. We're getting a lot of them today. And I believe that we ought to communicate to young people how important it is for them to serve, and that we, the civic leaders, political leaders in our country, and those who care about our country, ought to do that by talking to our young people, not coercing them, not by sending them a draft note and saying you must show up and you must serve, but because they want to serve. I want them to want to serve, not because we send them a draft notice, but because they want to serve their country. And I don't think we've done enough to challenge them to serve that we should reach at this point for the draft.
Thank you. My name is Agron Alibali. I am a visiting researcher at the Harvard Law School. I had a question that was somehow addressed in the excellent commentary of the previous gentleman, but I'm asking it anyway. It's very brief. You mentioned you were in Kosovo and Korea. What was your impression of the feelings of the children and women and elderly and the population in general of Kosovo toward the American servicemen and servicewomen? Just your impression.
Tremendous gratitude, tremendous gratitude. I mean, I can tell you stories about soldiers have told me about children coming up and grabbing their sleeves and kissing the American flag and saying, your country, it's good, it's good. Of the refugees that I saw coming off the airplane, who we brought to the United States, and we housed them here, many of them now living here in the United States. The look on their faces, the gratitude. And soldiers will tell you, the ones who've been out there in the villages, in the areas, I mean, we have soldiers who stand 24-hour guard on someone's home to make it possible for them to live in their own home. And they are deeply grateful for what our country has done. And that's just a very, very priceless experience for a young American to have, to understand how the rest of the world looks to our country for leadership. I've talked to ambassadors and defense attachés from some of the former Soviet Union countries. They want to have closer security relations with the United States. They want to adopt all things American. Why? Because they want a higher standard of living for their people, because they don't ever want to be trampled on again. Because if they can have closer security relation with the United States, no one will ever take their freedom away again. And that's what our country represents in the rest of the world. And there are so many things that will not occur in this world if the United States does not exercise leadership. We have to do it in a thoughtful way. We cannot be an arrogant superpower. And we have to work in a multinational way, and we have to do it in a way that we can take our moral principle actions in partnership with other nations. But there is an undeniable role that we have to play.
Yes, this question? Yes, sir.
Hugo Morales, and I'm a Mixteco indígena from Oaxaca, graduate of class 72 of the college in law school 1975. Those of us that know, I now live in Fresno in Oakland, and those of you that know you or know about you are very proud of your appointment and the role that you play, and also the role that you played in California Politica. You have a tough job. And I want to ask you about what challenges you face in your position as a Latino, a Chicano, somebody from Califas, knowing the challenges that anybody would face in that position, but with your background, and also the expectation of those of us that are Indigena or are Mexicano or are Latino, those of us that are working class, those of us that would like to see, shall we say, a reestablishment, what we have seen, to some extent, those of us that experienced the 60s, perhaps not well esteemed, armed forces. What do you see your role in reestablishing some, how do you say, greater respect at large and addressing those issues? I think that were posed here today are very legitimate about what is going on with the Escuela de las Americas. What is going on with the Gobierno de Mexico that refuses to negotiate and respect, we as indigenas. It's a really tough job. How do you see your role in it?
I have a wonderful job. And the best part of my job is when I get to go out and talk to soldiers and see what they're doing and appreciate how wonderful the young people we have in our commitment, in our country, how deep their commitment is, and then try to do the things to make sure that our country is strong today and in the future, so we're making the right decisions in terms of what kinds of weapons, what kinds of organizations are we recruiting and promoting the right kinds of leaders. Part of what has really been very rewarding about this job is that I've had a chance to travel throughout the country and as I talk to soldiers, and I've met a lot of Hispanic American families and veterans and soldiers who are very proud to see someone in this position because they know of the tradition of military service by Hispanics. They know that a quarter of the names on the Vietnam Wall are Spanish surnamed, that 38 Medal of Honor winners are Hispanic Americans, because they know that many went and fought for this country and died and suffered long before their civil rights had been secured in this country. And they did it out of love of country. And now they see a vindication of all of that effort that they have done to build and create this country and what it can be. And so there is pride there. There is a recognition that there is opportunity in the Army and that we ought to be opening the doors of opportunity in the enlisted ranks and in the officer ranks to more young Hispanic Americans. The military has an important role to play in shaping world events. It is a limited role because it is just part of our nation's foreign policy apparatus. So we engage countries like Mexico on many, many very different terms. But across the military, we engage them on the basic principles that we think professional armies ought to live by. And those are to understand what your role is in a democracy, to strengthen democracy, to have civilian control. I am civilian control. I am a civilian who has control over the Army. In other countries, they don't have that. The top guy is a general, and there is more allegiance to the military than there is to the democratically elected government or the president or prime minister. We don't have that in our country, and so we get them to understand what civilian control is all about. What are the political decisions the civilians should make versus the expertise in being operationally proficient that the military should be able to do, and get them to adopt these kinds of models, and we try to train their defense officials to understand the checks and balances that they have, to have inspector generals, to have the ability to fire general officers if they are corrupt or misbehaving. And they are doing it, and they are moving in that direction. So through the military, I think we are playing a constructive role in engagement in Latin America and in the rest of the world, but it is only one part of the role that our country has to play also through its State Department and through our economic and other engagement.
Final question, please.
How you doing? My name is Carlos Vasquez from Jobs for Future Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles, and I'm actually going to be a panelist for the weekend. My question is, I never had the chance to serve in the military, but my brother's been serving for the past 10, 11 years now, and I noticed that a lot of Latinos, Chicanos, Mexicanos that are enlisted in the military, especially the Army, are kind of stuck in the same position. There's no real room for advancement, and it's And if you don't, you know, if you didn't have the chance to go to military school or any of the academies or university, you're stuck as an enlisted personnel for a long time, probably possibly forever. And what is the Army doing?
We have pretty good upward mobility. There are things that you do to get promoted, and part of what a leader's job is to do, the sergeant, the platoon leader, the company commander that is in your brother's unit, part of his job is to help prepare him to get promoted. Now, I don't have as many Hispanic general officers as I would like, but we are getting more, and we are growing them, and they are coming through the ranks. They got to come as lieutenants and make it all the way up to colonels to be available to be selected as general officers, and that's why we are dramatically increasing the number of ROTC cadets, West Point cadets, so they will come in as lieutenants, and 15, 20 years from now will be available to be the general officers. We are making good strides in seeing more Hispanics at the highest levels, sergeant majors of the Army and general officers and in the colonel ranks. Not as fast as I would like, but we are making progress in that direction. And I talk to our general officers, our 4 stars and our other general officers, about how important it is for them to be the kinds of leaders and mentors that they will make the best use of the talents of the people who work for them and help mold, give every soldier the opportunity to rise as far as his or her talents will take them, regardless of whether they are from America's oldest families or one of America's newest families. What their background, race, religion, creed, anything else is, your job is to take these soldiers and help them achieve what they can achieve, because that makes them more effective in their job. And so that's what the Army is about, because it's a people service. Those are our values, and that is what we work to do. And I think we do have good opportunity and upward mobility for those soldiers who will work. And I'll be happy to talk to you more about your specific brother's situation. If there's things he needs to do to get promoted, we will communicate those things to him. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. You'd be a good recruiter. With Sergeant Stripe there, you know, recruiter. Well, let me tell you, that was wonderful, because this is true confession time. The Army was the first time in my life I couldn't BS my way out of anything. And I was trapped. And it was a great experience. It was the first time in my life I could fool my teachers and my parents. I couldn't fool that sergeant. I couldn't fool that colonel. And it made me grow up. It was a great and important part of my life. But those that went to West Point, like this remarkable man, were the people we respected the most. The history of West Point. And so thank you. Your comments on ROTC. I was an ROTC graduate at the University of Wyoming. Wonderful experience. Reserve Officers Training Corps. And to see that when I came here, it was not allowed on this campus. This is a temple of diversity. and of hearing all sides and all views. I mean, we pride ourselves here at Harvard. I'm part of this. All but one. 300 organizations on the campus and no ROTC. That's pretty bad in my mind. Makes no sense, not in a university like this. Since 1638, go look at the wall on Memorial Church. Go look at the names they all gave their lives. And go look at the murals in the Widener Library. That's about war. And everything that's here and been preserved has been preserved by people who served in the military. So I can't tell you how proud I am to see you as our Secretary of the Army. You're an inspiration. Thank you very much.
I can just remind you all that we will be registering people for the conference tomorrow.